Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. Scott, NATO, accuses Russia of violating Polish and Romanian airspace with decoy drones. Some even call for a no-fly zone. Medvedev warns this means direct war, and the Kremlin says NATO is already de facto at war with Russia. With joint drills underway with Belarus, is this a real escalation toward World War III or just political noise?
Well, first of all, anytime you have NATO and Russia involved in anything that could lead to potential direct conflict, it's a danger and should be treated very seriously. And this current crisis should be treated very seriously. But let's understand reality. Russia did not attack Poland, and Russia did not attack Romania. Um, the Romanian drone could have been a drone that was deviated off course because of electronic warfare or some other action. The idea that Russia would send a single reconnaissance drone or a decoy drone into Romania is absurd facially. And the Polish incident appears to be, and even the Poles are having trouble denying this, it's just a Ukrainian setup. Um, Initially, I thought that, based upon the data that was available early on, that these were Shahed 136 Geranium-2 type drones that, according to the Belarusian Ministry of Defense, had been, captured by Ukrainian electronic warfare capabilities and diverted, into Poland. That doesn't appear to be the case. These appear to be disposable decoy drones that Ukraine has accumulated over time and repaired and then sent them into Poland in a premeditated, coordinated event, meaning that this didn't take the Poles by surprise. The Poles knew exactly what was happening, and it's all played to a script that basically has the Poles declaring an Article 4 emergency for the purpose of generating a NATO surge of resources into Poland. But that's just a front because the surge of resources is actually pretty pathetic. 2 Eurofighters for Britain. Sure, the Russians are losing a lot of sleep over that one. 3 Rafales from France. Again, wow. I think there was 2 more fighters sent in from Germany. So the British, the Germans, and the French sent a total of 7 fighters. America sent 10 F-35s to Puerto Rico because of one Venezuelan, alleged drug smuggling ship. So it just tells you that the Europeans aren't serious about this at all. The Poles, surged another 40,000 or 40,000 troops to the border, but that's not real military power. That's nothing. The big news here is that Ukraine now is going to be training NATO air defenses in how to intercept Russian drones and missiles. This is where it gets problematic because now what is happening is that we're creating a military force in Poland that will be able to almost immediately meld itself into Ukraine's integrated air defense should the decision be made to extend this air defense umbrella into Western Ukraine. Um, in the past, one of the big blocks was you just can't plug NATO into Ukraine. But now they're creating a situation where you can plug NATO into Ukraine. Ukraine is being plugged into NATO right now as we speak. This is the danger that NATO will become empowered, emboldened, or Poland might become unilaterally emboldened into believing that they can make a move on Western Ukraine. And that's where we get into the potential force-on-force conflict, and it spins out of control. But this was a 100% setup. The United States knows this. I mean, this is why Donald Trump's not losing any sleep over what's happening here. If for a moment we thought that this was a serious Russian incursion, you'd see American resources being surged in, but we're not playing that game. So this is a political game that everybody knows is a political game. The problem is the consequences of this political game are creating a military capability that can plug straight into a NATO military capability. Once it's finished being trained up, we'll be able to plug straight into Ukraine's integrated air defense in a seamless fashion.
Ritter calls it out. The airspace violations in Poland and Romania were staged events. What's more alarming is that NATO is building a pipeline to seamlessly integrate into Ukraine's air defenses, something that was off limits before. This isn't an accidental escalation, it's a calculated setup. The real question now is, how close are we to someone actually acting on it? Ukraine is nearing military collapse, leaving NATO with two options: talk or escalate. But since Europe refuses to even engage with Russia, escalation seems like the only path left. How do you assess Europe's overall strategy? What might they do in the final stage of this war?
Well, it's clear they're not going to escalate in a meaningful fashion. They don't have the ability to do this. I go back to, I think it was earlier this summer when Mr. Narishkin, the head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, I guess they held some sort of seminar where they discussed, what Ukraine could look like in a post-conflict scenario. And one of the things that was actively discussed was Western Ukraine being given to the Poles, meaning allowing the Polish to take over. I think this may be the safety valve here. I'll call it controlled escalation. As Ukraine itself devolves, dissolves, disintegrates, you will see a retreat of Ukrainian governmental resources to the west, in Lvov and other cities, along with Ukrainian military resources, aircraft and things of that nature. At some point in time, I believe that part of the demilitarization plan of Russia is to allow Poland to extend, um, and this will be a humanitarian crisis as well, with millions of Ukrainians fleeing to the west, to create the conditions in which Poland can occupy Western Ukraine. In order to do that, Poland will have to extend its air defense into Western Ukraine. And I think that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at a scenario of a controlled collapse of Ukraine. Because now what happens? Poland will not allow a viable Ukrainian military to remain intact on territory that is under the control of Poland. So the Poles now will have demilitarization obligations to, you know, to take this equipment away from a Ukrainian military that will be, in effect, disarmed by NATO. Um, and also denazification. If you think the Poles, especially under their current president, are going to tolerate a Banderist Ukrainian government in Western Ukraine controlled by Poland, think again. And I think this is, a politically elegant solution that Narishkin apparently was considering. Whether or not Vladimir Putin concurs or whether or not the situation will, you know, evolve to where this becomes a possibility, it's unknown. But I don't see any scenario under which Europe does an aggressive, meaningful intervention designed to, have immediate engagement with Russian forces. What I see is Poland beginning the process of being prepared for a controlled absorption of Western Ukraine into the Polish sphere of influence. This is why you see 40,000 troops moving to the border. This is why you see talk about air defense integration, etc.
If Ukraine disintegrates, could we see a post-conflict deal where Poland takes protective control over the western regions and Russia accepts it as part of a settlement? This isn't just about Russia. Poland, Romania, and Hungary have long had issues with Ukraine's borders. Could this mark the beginning of a broader territorial reset?
Well, I mean, again, that same conference where Naryshkin and company contemplated Western Ukraine falling under a Polish sphere of influence. They also talked about Carpathia going to Hungary and other territories going to Romania as well. So we're looking at the partition of Ukraine. I believe that uh, look, we know that Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has said any Polish incursion into Western Ukraine will automatically bring Belarus into the war because they won't allow that. Um, so any Polish incursion into Western Ukraine, I believe, can't happen without the Russians greenlighting up front, which means that there probably already is an understanding between Russia and Poland. Um, that's just how intelligence services work. Um, that there is an understanding because neither side wants World War III. Nobody's looking for a conflict, and everybody understands that this has to be a controlled demolition of Ukraine. You can't just let it come down on its own because that leads to too many uncertainties and unpredictable outcomes. The goal here would be to create the most predictable outcome possible. Europe, of course, wants to avoid this because um, what we're talking about is an uncontested Russian victory, a total defeat for NATO. Um, but the idea of letting Russia win and not having a plan to stabilize the region, I think is, especially from a Polish perspective, unthinkable. So the Poles here have to be prepared to help with the controlled demolition of Ukraine.
NATO still insists on Ukraine's membership and sending troops post-ceasefire while panic grows in Europe. Moscow sounds increasingly firm. Is a direct military clash between Russia and European states possible, even without U.S. involvement?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that the United States sent military observers to the Zapad 2025 exercises. Total shot out of the blue, but two lieutenant colonels are on the ground in Belarus, given the ability to monitor the totality of these exercises. This isn't what you do if you're worried about a conflict with the United States. This is what you do when you're trying to convince the United States that that you pose no threat. Um, the other thing is we just have to deal with reality. Look, when my kids were told them that Santa Claus was real, and I said that Rudolph will bring the reindeer to our home, land on our roof, and Santa Claus will come down the chimney and put gifts under the tree. And I did this as long as the kids were willing to believe it. This is Mark Rutte today, because any notion that NATO is going to intervene is like selling the story of Santa Claus. It's not real. It's not going to happen. There is no intervention that NATO can do. None, zero. But the Germans are going to provide Taurus missiles. That's a death sentence for Germany, and they know it. But they're not going to do that. This is just all posturing. This is just ridiculous stupidity. No NATO nation has the ability to initiate and sustain meaningful military operations against Russia. None. Even the Poles with 40,000, they wouldn't get 20 kilometers inside Western Ukraine before they logistically came to a halt. Poland is incapable of logistically supporting that kind of advance in peacetime. Now imagine under fire how quickly this advance will collapse and how quickly those 40,000 Polish troops will become dead, wounded, or prisoners of war. That's the reality. They're going up against a battle-hardened Russian military and a Belarusian military that's been trained by battle-hardened Russian soldiers, or in the case of Wagner, mercenaries. Um, Poland knows this. They're not stupid. We're talking about professional military officers who know how to read a map and they know how to read a balance of power ledger and they understand what's going on here. This is all political nonsense that's being played out here. There will be no European military intervention, not without the United States backing it up with its full military power. And I just told you, the United States put 2 military observers on the ground in Belarus, not to spy on them for future military actions, but to send a signal. We understand we're looking for stability here. We're not looking for confrontation. We're not looking for surprises. That's the reality. There will be no major European military intervention. First of all, in order to do this, you need support of your people. And I don't see support coming out of France, and I don't see support coming out of the United Kingdom, and I don't see support coming out of Germany. And frankly, I don't see support coming out of Poland either. The vast majority of the Polish people are against the concept of going to war with Russia. So this is just a fantasy on the part of Rutte, who's looking at NATO collapsing around his eyes. I mean, it's over. I said when Rutte was brought in as the Secretary General, I said he could very well be the last Secretary General that NATO ever has. And I think it's becoming more and more likely that this could indeed be the case. And he's not going to go gently into that good night. He'll go screaming, screaming, screaming. But it doesn't change the fact that NATO is a failed institution. They're not going to be able to afford the kind of repair work necessary to turn them into a credible military organization. And this strategic defeat that they will suffer at the hands of Russia will be the death knell for not just them, but for Europe.
What worries me isn't sudden intervention, but this slow-burning escalation, incremental steps deeper into the war. U.S. generals have long coordinated logistics and targeting from Germany. Isn't NATO underestimating Russia's patience, assuming Moscow won't respond?
But wait, Glenn, what do you mean the Russians are? They killed 1.7 million Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's
They destroyed everything NATO sent their direction. This is a war of attrition. I mean, that's the mistake that Keith Kellogg and others make, because you're not getting the big red arrows on the map. Obviously, Russia's not replicating the capture of Berlin, but that's not what this war is about. This war is about achieving the military collapse of Ukraine and NATO, which is happening as we speak, because 1.7 million Ukrainian soldiers are, no longer able to fight. There's, more than 2 million wounded out there. All the equipment that NATO provides ends up in the scrap heaps, or it's rotated back into Europe to be repaired, only to come back and die again. Russia's destroyed everything. This is the sixth Ukrainian army Russia's destroying right now. The sixth time that NATO's rebuilt it. I'd say that it's quite obvious that Russia is defeating NATO across the board, hands down, no questions asked.
The West keeps striking deep into Russian territory, now claiming that systems like the Taurus are produced inside Ukraine. In this context, how do you see the war evolving? Is Russia preparing a major offensive, or will it continue its attritional strategy and focus on logistics?
I don't anticipate the coup de grace that everybody's, this massive war-winning offensive. I see the Russians have a winning formula right now, and it's doing very well for them. We still need to respect the fact that Ukraine has a very large military, and within this military, there are units that possess considerable combat power, and that Russia has to treat these units with respect, meaning that the last thing you want to do is do a repeat of the Soviet counteroffensive after Stalingrad, where they succeeded in surrounding the Sixth Army, but then they overshot, and that's what sent the Fourth Tank Army off. It got cut off, and everybody died. The Russians aren't in the business of allowing their units to be sacrificed in that manner. The war will end when Ukraine collapses militarily, economically, and politically. And there's a synergy between the three of those. There's connectivity. So the Russians right now will continue to destroy the Ukrainian military through a war of attrition that's also resulting in significant, territorial gains. Not the big arrows that, everybody expects from World War II, but, they're advancing 5 kilometers a day in some areas. That's not bad. They will continue the economic warfare. You're seeing that with their drones. They're taking out, critical defense industry targets, but they're also starting to hit energy-related infrastructure, et cetera. And politically, I mean, Zelensky's just in an outright panic right now, and everybody around him is in a panic. And I think what you'll see is that as the military degrades, the economy degrades, the political foundation of Zelensky's support will degrade. And at some point in time, you're going to see collapse. And when that collapse happens, then we're going to look at the potential of this controlled demolition of Ukraine, where Russia will now turn to the Poles and say, now. And then the Poles will come in and take Western Ukraine while the Russians move in and consolidate with Kiev and Odessa and et cetera. There might be some demilitarized zone between the Russians and the Poles that's agreed upon to deconflict. Um, but this is the way I see this war going. I don't see big arrows. I don't see a major offensive design to solve this. I see the Russians, knowing that as long as Europe is able to flood Ukraine with military resources, that Ukraine will fight to the last Ukrainian. And unfortunately for Ukraine, there's still a lot of Ukrainian manhood out there that is capable of being sacrificed on the field of battle. And Russia will just continue grinding this down until you get the collapse across the three pillars that I discussed.
With Ukraine collapsing, how do you assess Trump's position? He says it's not his war, yet threatens Russia and pressures Europe. Is this about maintaining influence, playing to voters, or simply continuing Biden's policy under a different banner?
No, I think every once in a while, if you listen to Donald Trump, the truth will work its way out of his mouth. And he just this week said that the Ukraine-Russian conflict was just too hard. I mean, it's proven much harder than he thought it could be. Um, so what he's done is he's created conditions that are unattainable. He's playing the tough guy. I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to collapse Russia's economy, but I can't go alone. Europe, you got to come in. You got to not only go after the Russian, stop buying Russian energy, which Europe can't do at this juncture, um, but you also have to uh, punish India and China with sanctions, which will destroy the European economy. Therefore, they can't do it. So Trump set forth conditions that are impossible to reach. And I think he did it on purpose because now he can say Europe's not serious about ending this war. Therefore, don't expect us to bear the brunt of this. We're out of here. This is how he unplugs. And that will be part of the economic, military, and political collapse of Ukraine when the United States makes the strategic decision to unplug from Ukraine. And that'll be sooner rather than later. I don't think Trump's going to drag this thing out forever. He's given Europe a chance. I don't believe Europe's going to be able to meet the conditions that Trump has set. And there's no fallback position. At that point in time, Europe will be totally on their own. And because they can't sustain this kind of leverage, Ukraine will be compelled to, either accept a deal, which they won't, or, fight without adequate support, which will lead to collapse, which I think is ultimately going to be the outcome here, where Europe is going to be limited into what they can provide. The Ukraine will be starved of resources, military and economic. And you'll see, as I discussed earlier, there's a relationship between military, society, political, and economic collapse. And I think you'll see all three go down right about the same time.
Scott Ritter argues that Ukraine is heading toward a complete collapse, militarily, economically, and politically. NATO cannot intervene directly, and Europe is not ready to fight Russia. A likely scenario is a controlled disintegration. Western Ukraine could fall under Polish control while Russia consolidates the east and south. The U.S. under Trump is preparing to exit the conflict, blaming Europe for lack of resolve. Conclusion: peace won't come through negotiations. The war will end through Ukraine's exhaustion and territorial redistribution. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.